Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're diving into InfoEdge India Ltd today. They're making some serious waves in the Indian online classifieds market. And we've got a ton of sources to dig through, website excerpts, financials, investor presentations, the whole works. We're going to equip you with all the knowledge you need to decide for yourself if this company has potential.
Yeah, and you know what's really interesting here is India's digital landscape is exploding right now,
Hmm.
and InfoEdge is smack dab in the middle of it all, strategically positioned for some major growth.
And they own some names you might recognize already, like NoCree.com. That's the one for job seekers, right?
Right.
And then there's 99acres.com for real estate.
Mm.
But they're not stopping there. They've got Jeevansathi.com for matchmaking and even Sheetsha.com for education. It's like they're covering every major life decision you could possibly make.
You got it. InfoEdge is banking on the fact that India is going digital in a big way, and they want to be the platform people turn to for those key moments in life. It's a pretty smart diversification strategy when you think about it. They're spreading the risk while tapping into some massive growing markets.
Okay, so it's a bold strategy, but is it actually working? Let's start with their flagship platform, Naukri.com. They're boasting something like 82 million resumes. That's like the entire population of Germany, all looking for jobs. They also say they have around 70,000 job seekers paying for premium services. Those numbers sound pretty impressive, but are they really?
Well, Naukri.com definitely dominates the online recruitment scene in India. They're claiming close to 80% of the traffic share. But yeah, that 70,000 number for paid users, it does raise a question. When you consider that massive pool of 82 million resumes, is that conversion rate really high enough? That's something you'll want to think about as you dig deeper.
All right, so Naukri.com is the big kahuna, no question there. But
Yeah.
what about those other ventures? Are they just side projects, or do they have the potential to become stars in their own right? We're talking about real estate, marriage, education, some pretty big life events. Is InfoEdge actually a leader in those areas, or are they just dipping their toes in the water?
Well, that's where things get even more interesting. Those other sites might not be as big as Naukri.com, YUT, but they're operating these huge markets that are only getting bigger. To figure out if they've got real potential, we need to look at the financials.
All right, time to crunch some numbers. Our sources say InfoEdge is almost debt-free. Got to be a good sign, right? And they've also seen 49.9% profit growth over the past 5 years. That's incredible.
Yeah, being debt-free puts them in a really strong position, especially if there's any kind of economic downturn. They've got a lot of flexibility. But here's where it gets a little tricky, and we need to dive deeper. Because even though they've got impressive profit growth, their return on equity, or ROE, it's been relatively low over the past 3 years.
Okay, so for those of us who aren't financial wizards, what exactly does ROE tell us? And why should we be concerned if it's low?
So basically, ROE, it measures how profitable a company is in relation to the investments made by shareholders. And a low ROE, it could be a sign that InfoEdge is struggling to generate good returns on the capital invested, which could affect their future growth. It's definitely a flag for potential investors.
So on the surface, they look great, debt-free, and profitable. But that low ROE hints that there might be some issues beneath the surface. It's starting to feel like a bit of a puzzle.
Exactly. And there's another piece to this puzzle we need to consider. There's a significant other income being reported in their financials. We really need to dig into that and see what's driving it. And more importantly, if it's sustainable in the long run.
So are we looking at a promising investment opportunity? Or is this a potential trap? It seems like there's a lot more to this story than meets the eye.
That's the big question. To figure out if InfoEdge is a good investment for you, we need to weigh the pros and cons. What are your priorities as an investor? And how much risk are you comfortable with?
That's a great point, because we've got all this data, shareholding patterns, quarterly results. It can feel overwhelming. What should an investor really focus on? What are the key takeaways here?
This is where you need to put on your critical thinking cap. We're giving you the pieces, but you need to put them together. What stands out to you from what we've discussed so far? Do the positives outweigh those potential red flags? Remember, this is just the tip of the iceberg.
All right, so we've established that InfoEdge is a major player in this market. Indian online classifieds, with Naukri.com as their crown jewel. They're branching out into other areas, potentially lucrative ones. But the jury's still out on whether those ventures will be successful. Financially, they seem strong, but that low ROE and other income need further investigation.
Absolutely. This is just the beginning of your research journey. You've got a solid foundation now. Where will you dig deeper?
That's a great question. Because InfoEdge's future is tied to this rapidly changing digital economy in India. There are so many factors at play. What are your thoughts on that?
It's an exciting landscape full of potential, but it definitely has its share of uncertainties. InfoEdge's journey is a fascinating case study in navigating this complex environment.
It really is. Now let's take a closer look at their financials, specifically their investment portfolio. This is where things get really interesting.
They're not just running their own platforms, they're actively investing in other businesses,
Ooh.
particularly startups in the online space. It's a common strategy for companies like InfoEdge. But why are they doing it? And how's it working out for them? Let's explore that further.
Yeah, if you look at their balance sheet, there's a pretty substantial amount that they're consistently holding in investments. It's not just about diversifying their own revenue streams, it's about staying ahead of the curve.
So they're kind of acting like venture capitalists, placing bets on the future of the internet in India.
Exactly. By investing in these startups, they get a front row seat to all the emerging trends, new technologies, new business models. They're basically trying to predict what the internet in India will look like in a few years.
Hmm.
It's a fascinating strategy. But for us, as potential investors in InfoEdge, how do we evaluate if these investments are actually successful? Are they making money?
Well, that's where it gets a little complicated. The value of these investments, it can go up and down quite a bit. It all depends on how well those startups perform. And sometimes InfoEdge might decide to sell off some of their holdings if they see a good opportunity.
So it's not just about steady profits. It's more of a dynamic, long-term game they're playing, which makes it even harder to assess their overall financial health.
Definitely adds another layer of complexity. Now, let's switch gears a bit and talk about InfoEdge's shareholding pattern. One thing that jumps out is the significant portion of shares that are still held by the founders and promoters.
Yeah, I noticed that too. What does that mean for a potential investor? Is it a good thing, a bad thing, or somewhere in between?
It's open to interpretation. On the one hand, it shows that the founders are really committed to the company's success. They've got skin in the game, so to speak, which can be reassuring for investors.
So it signals that they're not just in it for a quick buck. They're genuinely invested in the long-term vision of InfoEdge.
Right, but on the other hand, it also means they have a lot of control over the company. Some investors might prefer a more spread-out shareholding structure, where no single entity holds that much power.
So it's a trade-off then. Commitment and vision versus concerns about too much control in one place.
Exactly. How you view it depends on your investment philosophy and your tolerance for different levels of control within a company.
I think this is why these deep dives are so valuable. We're uncovering these nuances that you might not see at first glance. We've talked about their business model, their financials, their investment strategy, even their shareholding patterns. But before we move on, I want to touch on something else. Corporate governance.
Yes,
Yeah.
very important, especially for long-term investors who are looking for stability and ethical practices.
Exactly. So how does InfoEdge measure up in terms of transparency and accountability? And just generally doing things the right way?
Well, from what we've seen in our research, they seem to have a pretty good track record. They've received some recognition for their commitment to transparency and ethical business practices. So it looks like they're trying to do things the right way, not just chasing profits at any cost.
That's good to hear. Strong corporate governance builds trust, and that can contribute to creating value over the long term.
Absolutely. And for a company like InfoEdge, they're playing such a big role in India's digital transformation. Strong corporate governance is even more important.
All right, let's do a quick recap here. We've explored InfoEdge's diverse portfolio, their strong financial performance, but with some potential red flags, their strategic investments in all these startups, and even their shareholding structure.
And we've also seen that they have a good track record on corporate governance, which makes them even more appealing for investors who are looking for ethical and sustainable businesses.
Now, before we wrap up this part, let's zoom out for a minute and think about the bigger picture. What does InfoEdge's story tell us about how the internet is evolving in India?
That's a great question. I think their journey offers a really fascinating glimpse into the rapid growth and transformation of India's digital economy. They started as pioneers in online recruitment. They were really early to capitalize on the internet boom in India. And as the market matured, they diversified strategically into other sectors, leveraging their brand and expertise to grab these new opportunities.
So they're almost a microcosm of the whole digital revolution happening in India, adapting and evolving right along with it.
Exactly. InfoEdge's story is a testament to the entrepreneurial spirit and the innovative drive that's fueling India's digital growth. But it also highlights some of the challenges and uncertainties that come with such a dynamic and competitive environment.
It's one thing to ride the wave of a booming market, But it's a whole different ballgame to navigate all the complexities
Yeah.
and adapt to the constantly changing tides.
Yeah, you need agility, adaptability, and a willingness to experiment. Their investments in startups, that's a perfect example of this mindset. They're not just protecting their existing territory, they're actively searching for the next big thing.
Always looking ahead, trying to anticipate the next wave. That's
Yeah.
a crucial lesson for any company operating in today's fast-paced digital world.
Absolutely. InfoEdge's story is a compelling example of how to thrive in the digital age. It shows the importance of early mover advantage, strategic diversification, continuous innovation, and taking calculated risks.
And it reinforces the critical role of robust corporate governance in building sustainable value over the long term.
Now, as we move towards our final thoughts, let's leave our listeners with one key takeaway to consider.
Okay, what's the one thing we want our listeners to remember about InfoEdge?
Well, I think it's this. InfoEdge's success is intertwined with the growth of India's digital economy. Their future depends on things like continued expansion of internet access, adoption of digital services, and the emergence of new innovative businesses. Their journey isn't just an interesting business case, it's a commentary on how technology is transforming India and how the dynamics of a rapidly developing nation are changing.
It's a bet on the future of India's digital landscape.
Exactly. So we've covered a lot of ground, but there's one crucial piece of the puzzle we still need to examine: how InfoEdge operates as an investor. What's their approach to choosing which companies to back? What's their secret sauce?
All right, so we've talked about InfoEdge as a company. But now let's switch gears and think about them as an investor. With this active portfolio of startups, what are they looking for when they choose a company to back? How do they try to pick winners?
Well, it seems like their main philosophy is to find sectors that are about to take off, experience rapid growth. And just as important, to partner with really strong management teams. They're not after those quick profits. It's more about finding companies that can shake things up, disrupt the market, maybe even create entirely new markets.
So they want those game changers, not just companies making small improvements.
Exactly. And they're not afraid to take risks, but they're calculated risks. They've got this team of experienced investors, and they really scrutinize every potential investment, looking at things like market size, the competition, the founder's track record.
That sounds like a good balance of bold moves and careful analysis.
Mm.
They're not just throwing money at any shiny new startup that comes along.
Right. And another thing that's really key for them is they have a long-term perspective. They get that building a successful company takes time, so they're willing to be patient investors.
That's got to be reassuring for those startups.
Yeah.
It shows that InfoEdge is really invested in their growth, not just trying to make a quick profit and move on.
Yeah, and that patient approach seems to be paying off. They've had some really impressive wins in their portfolio, with several companies becoming major players in their industries.
They seem to have a good eye for spotting potential, but realistically, not every investment is going to be a home run.
Of course not. That's just the nature of venture capital. There are always going to be some failures. The key is to have more wins than losses. And InfoEdge's track record suggests they're doing a pretty good job at that.
So for someone thinking about investing in InfoEdge, their investment portfolio adds a whole other interesting layer. It's like a potential source of future growth and value.
Exactly. It's almost like they're playing a multi-level game, competing in the market with their own platforms, but also investing in the future of that market through their venture capital activities.
It's a smart strategy that keeps them ahead of the game, adapting to changes and capitalizing on new trends.
Now, as we wrap up our deep dive into InfoEdge, let's leave our listeners with one final thought. Let's fast forward 5 years to 2029. What do you think InfoEdge will look like then? Will those other ventures, the real estate, matrimony, education platforms, will they have reached their full potential? Will they be bringing in serious revenue, rivaling Naukri.com? Or will Naukri.com still be the main driver of the company's growth?
That's the big question, isn't it? And the answer depends on your own research and analysis, your own assessment of InfoEdge's prospects.
We've given you the framework, the tools, the insights. Now it's up to you to dig deeper, explore those unanswered questions, and come to your own conclusions.
Exactly. Think of this deep dive as a starting point, the launch pad for your own exploration of the Indian online classifieds market. There's so much to discover, so stay curious, stay informed, and happy investing, everyone.